You've worked as a reporter for the Washington Post for like a long time.
Yes.
What was that? What's it like working as a reporter? Were you mainly based in Washington, D.C. or DC area, or did you just go around based on whatever you were reporting at the time?
For me, it was a wonderful job. I used to kind of wake up in the morning and say, God, they're paying me to write. I like writing. I like telling stories. I think all reporters like telling stories. Um, so it was a great job. It was a great place to work. It's a good newspaper. I was proud of it. I loved the editors. The owners were really decent people. It was best for me when I got out of the newsroom. The Washington Post newsroom is this huge room with hundreds of reporters. There's a lot of buzz, a lot of camaraderie. Some woman comes running in and says, I'm going to blow the roof off the White House in tomorrow's paper. It's pretty exciting. Um, but there was one thing I didn't like, and that is when you're in the newsroom there, nobody gets an office. It's very democratic. Everybody just sits at long desks. And your editor, the boss, is at the end of that long desk, maybe 10 feet away, and she can come down and look over your shoulder. And I didn't like that. I never got along very well with authority. And every once in a while, they would send me up to cover Congress, and the Capitol is 2 miles from the Washington Post office. But that 2 miles made a huge difference. They just left me alone. Sometimes the phone would ring on the Washington Post desk up in the Capitol, and for some reason, I never heard it. I just never answered. And so I thought, well, gee, getting 2 miles away really made a difference. Maybe I could do this even better. So then I became a foreign correspondent. I got 10,000 miles away from the boss, and that really worked. They totally left me alone. Um, when I was in Tokyo or Beijing, if the editor ever called me, if my boss ever dare called me, it didn't matter what time of day it was, I would say, God, do you know what time it is? What are you trying to wake up your kids? Come on, leave me alone. And
Yeah.
after about a week or two, they stopped calling. They left me alone. And so that was really good. So our family spent 16 years overseas. I
Hmm.
think being a foreign correspondent was great work. The bosses never bugged me. I mean, particularly when I was in East Asia, they didn't know what the hell was going on in Japan or China or Malaysia. They had
Hmm.
no idea. So they left it to me. I subsequently then reported out of Europe, and the big editors at the Washington Post, they had all been London bureau chiefs at one point or another. So they thought they knew what was going on. And if they said something to me, I'd say, yeah, that was probably true 15 years ago when you were here, but not anymore. So they pretty much left me alone, and I liked that a lot. So I really liked the work. And the whole time I was reporting for the Washington Post. I was reporting on NPR. I was making movies for PBS. That was rewarding. Um, I used to think, maybe you can't trust what's in the newspaper, but if it's in a movie, it must be true. You can see it with your own eyes. And then I started making documentary films, and I realized that's not true. You point to something that's happening, and if the producer doesn't like it, well, that never shows up in the film until he sees a scene he does like. I think documentary film is much less reliable than print journalism, at
Hmm.
least if the reporter's trying to get it right.
Hmm.
So I did all those, and then I started writing books, and writing books has its own form of satisfaction. If you're writing for a newspaper, you're banging out the story about 8 p.m. or 9 p.m., and it's going to be in print on the street by 1 a.m., pretty quickly. If you're writing a book, it's 3 years from the time you write the first word before it appears in a bookstore. So it takes some patience, but it's quite rewarding. You can, if you have to explain something and it takes a while, okay, you can take 5 pages to explain it and give it what it needs. So for the last, 10, 15 years, I've just been writing books, occasional articles, but mainly books, and I find it quite rewarding. It's good.
Hmm.
Sometimes my books sell. I'd say most of the time my books have flopped in the market, but since 2000, I've had 3 bestsellers, and so you make a little money on the side too, so that's a pretty good deal.
Yeah. What kind of stories were you reporting when you were in Washington as compared to when you were abroad? Was it political? Was it economical? Was there a difference between the stories in Washington, D.C., or did they require you to report on one story, or did you have the option to pick your topic of choice?
Well, for a while, I was what they call a general assignment reporter, which means whatever story comes along that morning um, happens. One day, I don't know if this is a name you know, but Ben Bradley was the famous editor of the Washington Post. He was a famous guy in journalism, and the front page of the Washington Post was the most important piece of real estate in the world for him. What was going to be on his front page tomorrow or the next day really mattered. And one day I went up to Ben Bradley and said, I'm going to be at the top of your front page tomorrow. And he said, what do you got? What do you got?
Yeah.
And what I had was, this was about 1980, yeah, 84. So I had a friend in the U.S. Treasury Department whose job it was to track the national debt. This is the accumulated debt that the United States has been running up since 1776. And around about 1984 or so, when Ronald Reagan was president, it was about to top $1 trillion for the first time in history. And so every day I kept calling this guy saying, where is it? He said, well, let's see, it's 999,940,000 today. It's going to go over tomorrow. So I said to Ben Bradley, I'm going to have your lead story. The national debt tops $1 trillion. And, about 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, my buddy called me and said, yeah, $1,000,016. It's over $1 trillion. And I wrote that story, and sure enough, it did run at the very top of the front page of the Washington Post. And then the best thing that happened was a whole bunch of congressmen, particularly Republicans, but Democrats too, started trashing me and the Washington Post for reporting this, just reporting the fact. And, we had a perfect answer. You're the guys who spent the money. I didn't do that. It's your fault. Don't get mad at the messenger. You're the guys who spent ran up the $1 trillion debt. Anyway, I just want to point out something interesting. At the time, everybody thought $1 trillion of national debt, my God, it's unsustainable. We're all going to go broke. Our kids are going to be paying taxes like mad for the next 100 years. Today, the national debt is $22 trillion, 22 times as much as it was then, and nobody cares about it. And as a matter of fact, we're borrowing that money from China and Japan and the Saudis for less than 1%. So it just seems to say to me, for all the belly aching about the national debt over the years, it's up 22 times what it was when people were complaining about it in 1984. And now it's almost not an issue because we're borrowing the money so cheaply. I found it interesting. Anyway, so I had those stories. Then they sent me to cover Congress. That was a great job. It was really a good job because if you're a reporter, you work pretty hard on each story and you'd like somebody to read it. Well, if you're covering Congress for the Washington Post, everybody reads your story every day. Every senator, every rep, every staffer, everybody reads those stories. That was the good news. Everybody would come up to me and say, hey, I saw your story today. That was the good news. The bad news is half of them would say, I saw your story today and it's dead wrong. You're an idiot. How could you do that? If you quoted the guy's boss and he looked pretty good, then they would say, great story. And if you wrote something and didn't even mention that guy's boss, then they'd say, boy, you're a terrible reporter. It's junk. So that was a good job. I covered the White House for a while, being White House correspondent. It's a very high-flying, high-profile job, but it's actually a terrible job. Basically, you're a stenographer. They stand up there and say, today, the President of the United States did the following 5 great things, and you're supposed to write that down and report it. I didn't find that to be serious reporting, even though people elbow and push and spend their lives trying to become White House correspondent. I didn't think that job was very good. And then, as I said, I became a foreign correspondent. Those were the best jobs because the paper totally left me alone. I called it. If I thought it was news, I reported it. and they didn't know enough to say you're wrong. So it was fine.
Mm-hmm. And what were some of the, like, you've been to pretty much all over the world. Do you have any like favorite countries or cultures or like places like where you have fond memories? Like, which countries do you like going to?
Well, I really loved East Asia because I put 25 years into learning Chinese and Japanese, and got over there and was able to use it. I used my languages every day. That's pretty rewarding, you know. That was so, and I still love going back there. I just, you know, East Asia is very exotic. And then I got into India only about, I guess, I made a couple of movies in India for PBS in early in 2006 and 10. I did a lot of reporting on India and Nepal for National Geographic, and God, I just loved it. It's so rich. It's just teeming with people, and you know, you're riding a rickshaw through downtown Mumbai, and an elephant goes by. Some guy riding an elephant goes by on the street, and we always used to say, as you probably know, driving in India feels like you're in a video game. There are all these different things coming at you for different directions. And then there's a guy with a donkey and a guy with an elephant. And so I really loved South Asia too. I really like that. And then for years, my family lived in London and I covered Europe, and that was quite also sophisticated and fun. And I think I learned something quite interesting in Britain. Actually, it was a Brit who told me this. So you go to Britain and they dress like us, you know, they wear a shirt and tie, and they look like us, and they have an accent, but they're talking our language. You know, they have newspapers and TV shows. And I mean, it kind of feels like you're in the United States, but it's not. Britain is not in the United States. It's European. And that's quite a striking different look at the world. I mean, for example, I knew the leader of the Conservative Party quite well when I was a reporter in Britain. For some reason, he got interested in me and we were friends. So the leader of the Conservative Party in Britain, he favors free medical care for all. He favors abortion on demand paid for by the government. The leader of the Conservative Party favors a ban on all handguns. He supports free higher education for everybody paid for by the taxpayers. That's the conservative view. So that's a European way of looking at the world. They just like government more than Americans do. And it took me a while, but pretty quickly I caught on to the fact that this European worldview, particularly the European view of the relationship between individuals and government, was strikingly different from America, even though they look and talk like us.